articles on Fox Business. I know you've done webinars, drilled down on the recent stimulus bill that's helping the American economy. But man, you've stayed right on top of that. And it's been very helpful to all of us in the trenches of local church pastoral ministry. So thank you. And thanks for having me today. Yeah, I've been in full-time ministry 36 years. The first 18 of those as a student ministries pastor. The final 8 of those brought me to Little Rock and into a wonderful church here in town, Fellowship Bible Church. In 93 to 01, went from 2 to 5,000 people. Just an outstanding work. My youth group from 150 to 600. And I'm not about numbers. I'm just saying it was just an explosive time of growth in that church and in the city and what was being accomplished. In the late 90s, then, as a part of that church, in the midst of an otherwise amazing ministry, one day I looked around that church and recognized that essentially the only people of color were janitors. And that began to bother me. I didn't know why at the time it bothered me, but it began to bother my spirit. And so essentially, it took me back to my exegetical theology degrees and dig into the New Testament to come to recognize that every church in the New Testament outside of Jerusalem was what we would call today a healthy, multi-ethnic, economically diverse church. And it was that expression of the kingdom of God on earth as it is in heaven that really advanced a credible gospel in those times. And so that burned a passion in me to see and to dream. What if a church could exist in the urban center of Little Rock where Blacks, whites, Asians, Hispanics, rich, poor, could all walk, work, worship God together as one. And so in 2001, I launched that church, Mosaic, again, in the heart of the urban center of Little Rock. That was, almost 19 years ago. In fact, this past weekend, the end of March 2020, we celebrated our 18th official birthday. But yes, that got me into the entire multi-ethnic ministry. Of course, we were building a car as we drove it in those days. And very few people, of course, were actually thinking about or doing this. I certainly didn't start this movement. There were others before me, but in 2004, George Yancey and I started the Mosaics Global Network to aggregate the handful of voices that were pursuing that vision intentionally. And then what happened is that through the years in building a healthy, multi-ethnic, economically diverse church, very quickly, we realized that the more people that joined our church, it cost us money. And that was a very different model from the American evangelical and mega churches I've been a part of, where the more people joined your church, it brought revenue into your church. In the urban center, building a multi-ethnic, economically diverse church, it was quite the opposite. The more people that joined, it actually cost us money. And very quickly, we realized as we advanced into social justice and compassionate work in the community, mercy ministry, et cetera, that we would not be able to meet the demand and the needs of the community if we solely relied on tithes and offerings to do so. And that led us to create a separate nonprofit, an umbrella nonprofit focused on our urban center, a zip code called 72204, under which we aggregated our social justice, compassionate, and mercy ministry, moved it out from under the budget of the church into the nonprofit, and then in time established for-profit business enterprise by ultimately purchasing a facility, renovating it, renting it out to local businesses, leveraging our assets, our people, our money, and our facility to bless the community, but at the same time generate sustainable revenue for the church and income. So today, with about a roughly $1.2 million budget, some 500 to 600 folks that attend on a weekly service, that is prior to the COVID crisis. I hope to get back to that sooner than later. But on a $1.2 million budget, roughly 30% is funded in unrelated business income. So only 70% of our budget comes directly from tithes and offerings. And years ago, we thought, well, that was just us. Or then we thought, well, maybe that's just urban churches. But eventually we realized that is a coming revolution in the thought and the psyche of the American church. And that's why the book that we published with Baker in October builds upon that, this idea of how do you actually fund the church in the future, given automation, given potential disruption through local, state, federal taxes, and of course, in this new norm that will be created by the COVID crisis. How do you fund that work? So the book is called The Coming Revolution in Church Economics, Why Tithes and Offerings Are No Longer Enough and What You Can Do About It. And we explained this model in that book. And of course, it's picked up a lot of traction. And then with this, of course, we, in a sense, predicted a lot of things we couldn't predict, that a health crisis, a virus would accelerate that revolution and bring it literally to our doorstep. And that's when I'm most concerned. We're speaking here, end of March, 1st of April, but I'm very concerned that roughly 45 to 50% of churches, based on some polling that I've done, that Tom Rainer's done, right now say they can't last another 1 to 3 months financially. And again, the COVID crisis accelerated something that was already in the works, and a repurposing of the church, a disruption of the economic model going forward. So with all that in mind, that's who I am. That's what I've been doing for the last 36 years. And again, appreciate the time to be with you today.
Absolutely, man. I'd love to hear. So we've been talking about your book for a while. We've both used Baker as a publisher, and they're kind of awesome. They're known as the people that put out the textbook on things. And so I've known a lot about this for a while and known your heart, but like, give me 2 or 3 actionable steps a church can take. Because we are recording right now, very end of March 31. I'm watching the quarter numbers for the Dow come in and the quarter numbers for lots of things come in. And it's just not a fun time. And apparently Q2 is going to be kind of second verse, same as the first. So what are 2 or 3 actionable items a pastor could take right now to diversify their income streams over the next 6 months?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. And let me answer it in 2 ways. Let me talk about kind of a quick short term that I believe pastors need to be thinking about immediately. And then again, something that will position the church longer term. I've been sharing on podcasts and webinars like this over the last couple of weeks. The immediate need is to shore up your finances. And as you've written about, and you guys, y'all at Vanderbloemen, guys and girls, women and men, drilled down deep on that for us. And it's so good, the resource you've provided. But if churches are relying on the government or a stimulus bill to keep them in business long term, when that money's gone, in other words, now what, right? And so it's very helpful, that stimulus bill. But again, in 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, then what? That's the question. In the immediate moment, I've been sharing 4 quick questions. You got to think about this as a pastor, and I'll just speak about me personally. I have to ask myself, how can I cut expenses in my home to lower in my own personal life? Where can I cut expenses to take the burden off the church? In other words, let's say I could reduce my spending in my household by $500 a month. I could require $500 less from my church in the moment, which will help keep that church moving forward, alive, if you will. And that can stay on the books to help me and maybe return to me someday. But I can think about that. Our whole staff can think about that. Where can we lower expenses? We can also think about, where can we generate income, right? Is there any way that I can generate income in this moment, again, to take the burden off our church financially, and that be recorded again, and whether 100% back to me, 50% back to me someday. But if I can unburden my church in the moment for my own personal reducing expenses or generating income in a creative way based on my life experience, that could help my church. And then, of course, we have to think about that not only for the staff and encourage them to think like that, but then it comes down to, what about the church? Thinking about the church entrepreneurially, and that takes us to the more long-term structural disruption. And so when you think about what the church could do long-term in this regard and how it needs to restructure, and the quick down and dirty answer to your question is this: how do you leverage the assets of your church, which is people, money, and buildings, to bless the community, advance the common good, all that you'd want to do, but at the same time, generate sustainable income? At the end of the day, churches are going to have to create multiple streams of income. They cannot rely solely on tithes and offerings. They're going to have to learn to create multiple streams of income. And the way we suggest to do that, both in the book Disruption and in the book Coming Revolution in Church Economics, is by establishing a second nonprofit. You have your church, but then establishing a nonprofit separate from your church, but that you can aggregate your social justice, compassionate work, qualify for local, state, federal grants, the donations of other churches, the resources of other churches to support your local mission. And then the other thing is to establish for-profit business enterprise in the church, leveraging, again, those assets to bless the community, but to generate sustainable income. And all that's explained in the book, The Coming Revolution of Church Economics.
That's great. So, like, sounds like you had to do quite a bit of, I would think if you're not careful, if churches start trying to diversify their income without setting up other legal structures, you're asking for trouble from the IRS. You guys work quite a bit with accountants and attorneys to make sure that everything was kosher, or?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. I tell, in interviews like this, absolutely don't just take my word for it. Definitely get a lawyer involved, get an accountant involved, and make sure they're helping you think these things through at a structural level in a legal way. But having said that, the big fear that pastors have, one of the big fears that they have immediately talking about this is, as you raise, will I lose my tax exempt status? Will the church lose its tax exempt status by somehow generating profitable income, or what's called in the business world, or the IRS, the unrelated business income? So here's what I want pastors to understand, and this is true. You're not going to lose your tax exempt status for repurposing your church, your facilities, your people, your money towards profitable business enterprise. The IRS allows for nonprofits to actually start and even own their own LLCs, their own for-profit ministries. You can do it in a structural way by starting a business, let's say an LLC, or you can just generate unrelated business income, for instance, by renting your facility. Now, having said that, you're not going to get in trouble with the IRS unless let me say it like this, if you will do two things. You got to play by the rules. That's the bottom line. Play by the rules. So what are the rules? Well, number one is that any net profit that is generated, whether through unrelated business income or for profit through an LLC that's owned by the church, let's say, any net profit has to be returned to the mission of the nonprofit. In other words, if I had an elder board, and let's say there were 5 people on this board, and let's say we started a coffee business and made $20,000 of net income in a year, I can't go to the board and go, hey, we made $20,000, everybody gets a $4,000 bonus, right? You can't do that. The net profit has to go back to the nonprofit's revenue stream and into its budget. So that you have to do that. The other thing you can't do is leverage your nonprofit status to somehow avoid paying taxable income on that business. In other words, again, with a coffee example, if we had a coffee shop that's generating income, we have to pay taxes on that coffee shop, no different than any other coffee shop. And in fact, when you dig into the history of what created the unrelated business income and unrelated business income tax, it's because a nonprofit university in New York, when a man died, and he was the largest manufacturer of macaroni in the country. And when he died, he left it to this nonprofit university. And so instantly, this nonprofit university became the largest manufacturer of macaroni in America. And at the time, they weren't paying taxes on the business income, which other macaroni manufacturers cried foul. And that led to a decision, legal decision, that, hey, fine, you can make money on your macaroni business. You just have to pay taxes just like any other macaroni business. So by and large, if you do those two things, play by the rules, you're not going to have an issue. There's some other factors in that. Our friends at the ECFA have produced 2 books on that. Dan Busby, very good work that goes deeper into that. But by and large, pastors should not fear losing their tax deductible status, again, as long as they play by the rules. And lawyers and accountants, or even one lawyer, one accountant, can help you play by the rules, and that's why you need to seek them out.
Excellent. Excellent. What were some of the first ministries you guys used to diversify your income?
Well, it's, again, twofold answer, because what we're talking about is restructuring the church to create a separate nonprofit and a for-profit business enterprise. So beyond just tithes and offerings that come from the church. So the first foray into this for us was when we established in 2005, 2006, a separate nonprofit. In our case, we call it Vine and Village. Christ is the vine intersecting the village. So we had Mosaic Church. Now we have Vine and Village, a structural 501c3 separate from the church. And we moved 3 ministries out from under the budget of the church at that time into the budget of the nonprofit and under its direction. And that was an immigration counseling center, a food distribution center, and a program that worked with kids who age out of foster care. Those 3 programs came out from under the budget of the church into the budget of the nonprofit and allowed them to scale. Because again, if those programs exist in the budget of the church, there's only so much money. There's only so much that you can help them. Here's $100, here's $300 a month, whatever. But by getting it into the nonprofit, that opened us up for local, state, and federal grants. That allowed other churches to write checks to us to send their people to work. So the first foray into creating multiple streams of income to fund the mission of the church was when we moved these social justice and compassionate work programs out from under the budget of the church into a separate nonprofit, and opened up these other streams. As I may have mentioned before, and we've talked about, one of those programs that worked with kids who age out of foster care, once we set it up and moved into that structure, within 10 years, their budget was $1.2 million. Well, today, our entire church budget is $1.2 million.
Wow.
And that's just insane. So that would never happen if it would have stayed under the budget of the church. So that's the first place where we began to create multiple streams of income to fund our mission, was through the nonprofit. But then in terms of the for-profit side, and I won't give the backstory, I'll just say that it took us about 12 years to purchase a 100,000 square foot abandoned Kmart. And the only way we were able to make that purchase is because we had a vision to leverage that facility to generate income. So in 2016, we finally moved into this building after a 12-year chase. But 6 months before that, we were able to attract a suburban fitness club into the inner city, rent space to them at $2 a square foot, which basically was $8,000 a month for half the building, which paid our $7,400 mortgage.
Oh, wow.
And when they came into the building, then they put $1.7 million of infrastructure into it, which is to our credit. That building in 5 years went from 1.5 million in value to now 4.1 million in value. The church went from borrowing 1.1 as a loan to now having 1.1 equity in the building. And we rent our parking lot. We have other businesses in the facility that rent from us, everything from $200 a month to $500 a month to $8,000 a month. And the total aggregate money that we make just on the property now is roughly $12,000 a month in income. And our mortgage to the bank is $16,000. So we're continuing to pursue this because our goal is to get that entire mortgage erased by leveraging the facility. And so we can look our people in the eye someday and say, not one penny of your tithes and offerings that go into support the work of the Lord is going to finance a building. That we're using smart economic practices to leverage this asset and generate sustainable income. One other thing I'll tell you is not just renting the building, but we've also helped recently, 6 months ago or so, to start a new business. And so, for instance, we took $12,000 of tithes and offerings. We spent it on in a 700 square foot area of the building that was basically doing nothing, created 2 massage rooms. Believe it or not, we have a woman who's married to a guy on our staff, a massage therapist for 17 years. We got her up and running into business, 2 massage therapists. We're probably the only church, William, in America with a massage studio, two-room massage studio. We helped to launch their business. So we put $12,000 in, created the business. That business now pays us $500 a month. And in 2 years, we'll get our money back. And then beyond 2 years, we'll be making $500 a month or more as that business grows. So again, it's not just renting your facility, but thinking about how can we start new business, create jobs, generate tax revenue, repurpose abandoned property, help to lower crime. And all this is what gets the attention of those who are lost. Just economics is the evangelistic strategy of the 21st century.
That's so good. And it's going to be so important in the coming year or two as we try and come out of this hole that this virus has created. And nobody saw it coming, and the economy was strong, and now we're in a new reality. And I think the agility that you guys have shown over the years is going to be a great model for churches to come. The book is make sure I get it right, The Coming Revolution in Church Economics, right? It's been out since October, but probably more important than ever as everybody tries to think about revenue and how to diversify it and find a way to keep ministries going in a time of great, great need. So, Mark, I thank you so much for making time for us today. I really appreciate it.
You bet, bro. Thanks for having me, and thanks for all the good work you do at Vanderbloemen.
Thanks, Mark. Bye-bye. Hey, let's grab the intro one more time real quick because the record didn't start till about 30 seconds in, okay?
Okay.
Cool. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome again to my kids' bunk room with a fancy tarp in front of it. And they do get to sleep here at night, and no children are harmed during the filming of our podcast. But our Our background that was supposed to go to our brand new remote offices is now in the new remote office of my home while we're all hunkered down and waiting on this virus to get beaten down or for the Lord to remove it. And today we've got a great guest with us. Mark DeYmaz has written a wonderful book on how churches can diversify their financial incomes. And boy, what a topic. I mean, your book came out, what, in October, Mark?
Yeah, October of 2019.
Do you have any idea when you wrote it that it would be this relevant this fast?
Kind of, but man, no one could have predicted the virus. Like you said, we were looking more at coming potential tax shifts in the way government, counties tax property, thinking about automation and AI. A study in Oxford, 12 to 22% of jobs displaced by 2030 due to automation, AI. So yes, we were looking ahead to these changes, but thinking more like in 2 to 10 years, not in 2 months, 2 to 6 months. So yeah, that virus has definitely accelerated
Well,
what is now not just a coming revolution, that revolution is here.
well, I've been wanting to have you on for a while, and this just accelerated that. So appreciate you being with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
That'll get it. They'll be able to splice around and fix it. Thanks so much for making time. I know it's late there.
No, bro.
Appreciate it very much.
No, I appreciate you being willing to give some time and attention to this. I really do.
Sure thing. We make sure.
All right, and appreciate the agility